This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Czech Chris, London, UK. Nicholas Nickleby by Charles Dickens. Chapter 25. Concerning a young lady from London who joins the company, and an elderly admirer who follows in her train, with an affecting ceremony consequent on their arrival. The new piece, being a decided hit, was announced for every evening of performance until further notice, and the evenings when the theatre was closed were reduced from 3 in the week to 2. Nor were these the only tokens of extraordinary success, for on the succeeding Saturday Nicholas received, by favour of the indefatigable Mrs. Grudden, no less a sum than 30 shillings. Besides which substantial reward, he enjoyed considerable fame and honour, having a presentation copy of Mr. Curdle's pamphlet forwarded to the theatre, with that gentleman's own autograph, in itself an inestimable treasure, on the fly-leaf, accompanied with a note containing many expressions of approval, and an unsolicited assurance that Mr. Curdle would be very happy to read Shakespeare to him for 3 hours every morning before breakfast, during his stay in the town. "I've got another novelty, Johnson," said Mr. Crummles one morning in great glee. "What's that?" rejoined Nicholas. "The pony?" "No, no, we never come to the pony till everything else has failed," said Mr. Crummles. "I don't think we shall come to the pony at all this season. No, no, not the pony." "A boy phenomenon, perhaps?" suggested Nicholas. "There is only one phenomenon, sir," replied Mr. Crummles impressively, "and that's a girl." "Very true," said Nicholas. "I beg your pardon. Then I don't know what it is, I am sure." "What should you say to a young lady from London?" inquired Mr. Crummles. "Miss So-and-so, of the Theatre Royal, Drury Lane?" "I should say she would look very well in the bills," said Nicholas. "You're about right there," said Mr. Crummles; "and if you had said she would look very well upon the stage too, you wouldn't have been far out. Look here, what do you think of this?" With this inquiry, Mr. Crummles unfolded a red poster, and a blue poster, and a yellow poster, at the top of each of which public notification was inscribed in enormous characters, "First appearance of the unrivalled Miss Petowker, of the Theatre Royal, Drury Lane." "Dear me," said Nicholas, "I know that lady." "Then you are acquainted with as much talent as was ever compressed into one young person's body," retorted Mr. Crummles, rolling up the bills again. "That is, talent of a certain sort, of a certain sort. The blood drinker," added Mr. Crummles with a prophetic sigh. "The blood drinker will die with that girl. And she's the only sylph I ever saw who could stand upon one leg and play the tambourine on her other knee, like a sylph." "When does she come down?" asked Nicholas. "We expect her today," replied Mr. Crummles. "She's an old friend of Mrs. Crummles. Mrs. Crummles saw what she could do, always knew it from the first. She taught her, indeed, nearly all she knows. Mrs. Crummles was the original blood drinker." "Was she, indeed?" "Yes. She was obliged to give it up, though." "Did it disagree with her?" asked Nicholas. "Not so much with her as with her audiences," replied Mr. Crummles. "Nobody could stand it. It was too tremendous. You don't quite know what Mrs. Crummles is yet." Nicholas ventured to insinuate that he thought he did. "No, no, you don't," said Mr. Crummles. "You don't indeed. I don't, and that's a fact. I don't think her country will, till she's dead. Some new proof of talent bursts from that astonishing woman every year of her life. Look at her, mother of 6 children, 3 of 'em alive, and all upon the stage." "Extraordinary!" cried Nicholas.
"Ah! Extraordinary indeed," rejoined Mr. Crummles, taking a complacent piece of snuff, and shaking his head gravely. I pledge you my professional word I didn't even know she could dance till her last benefit, and then she played Juliet and Helen Macgregor, and did the skipping rope hornpipe between the pieces. The very first time I saw that admirable woman, Johnson,' said Mr. Crummles, drawing a little nearer, and speaking in the tone of confidential friendship, she stood upon her head on the butt end of a spear, surrounded with blazing fireworks.' 'You astonish me,' said Nicholas. 'She astonished me,' returned Mr. Crummles, with a very serious countenance. 'Such grace, coupled with such dignity! I adored her from that moment.' The arrival of the gifted subject of these remarks put an abrupt termination to Mr. Crummles's eulogium. Almost immediately afterwards, Master Percy Crummles entered with a letter, which had arrived by the general post, and was directed to his gracious mother. At sight of the superscription whereof, Mrs. Crummles exclaimed, 'From Henrietta Petowker, I do declare!' and instantly became absorbed in the contents. 'Is it?' inquired Mr. Crummles, hesitating. 'Oh yes, it's all right,' replied Mrs. Crummles, anticipating the question. 'What an excellent thing for her, to be sure!' 'It's the best thing altogether that I ever heard of, I think,' said Mr. Crummles. And then Mr. Crummles, Mrs. Crummles, and Master Percy Crummles all fell to laughing violently. Nicholas left them to enjoy their mirth together, and walked to his lodgings, wondering very much what mystery connected with Miss Petowker could provoke such merriment, and pondering still more on the extreme surprise with which that lady would regard his sudden enlistment in a profession of which she was such a distinguished and brilliant ornament. But, in this latter respect, he was mistaken; for, whether Mr. Vincent Crummles had paved the way, or Miss Petowker had some special reason for treating him with even more than her usual amiability, their meeting at the theatre next day was more like that of two dear friends who had been inseparable from infancy, than a recognition passing between a lady and gentleman who had only met some half a dozen times, and then by mere chance. Nay, Miss Petowker even whispered that she had wholly dropped the Kenwigses in her conversations with the manager's family, and had represented herself as having encountered Mr. Johnson in the very first and most fashionable circles; and on Nicholas receiving this intelligence with unfeigned surprise, she added with a sweet glance, that she had a claim on his good nature now, and might tax it before long. Nicholas had the honour of playing in a slight piece with Miss Petowker that night, and could not but observe that the warmth of her reception was mainly attributable to a most persevering umbrella in the upper boxes. He saw, too, that the enchanting actress cast many sweet looks towards the quarter whence these sounds proceeded, and that every time she did so, the umbrella broke out afresh. Once he thought that a peculiarly shaped hat in the same corner was not wholly unknown to him; but, being occupied with his share of the stage business, he bestowed no great attention upon this circumstance, and it had quite vanished from his memory by the time he reached home. He had just sat down to supper with Smike, when one of the people of the house came outside the door, and announced that a gentleman below stairs wished to speak to Mr. Johnson. 'Well, if he does, you must tell him to come up. That's all I know,' replied Nicholas. 'One of our hungry brethren, I suppose, Smike.' His fellow lodger looked at the cold meat in silent calculation of the quantity that would be left for dinner next day, and put back a slice he had cut for himself, in order that the visitor's encroachments might be less formidable in their effects. 'It's not anybody who's been here before,' said Nicholas, 'for he is tumbling up every stair. Come in, come in. In the name of wonder, Mr. Lillyvick!' It was indeed the collector of water rates, who, regarding Nicholas with a fixed look and immovable countenance, shook hands with most portentous solemnity, and sat himself down in a seat by the chimney corner. 'Why, when did you come here?' asked Nicholas. 'This morning, sir,' replied Mr. Lillyvick. 'Oh, I see. Then you were at the theatre tonight, and it was your this umbrella,' said Mr. Lillyvick, producing a fat green cotton one with a battered ferule. 'What did you think